Our relationships with our doctors and healthcare providers are really intimate relationships. We go to them when we are the most vulnerable. And when we are vulnerable, it's important to be seen and heard. Hello, good people. This is Joanna with the Harmonious.Balance channel, where I am here to encourage you that in the moments where you've missed your shot, not to bow out of the game, but to square up for another shot by grabbing the offensive rebound. So in the first video for the offensive rebound series, I explained what this whole series was all about. So if you missed it, please take a listen to it. I'll leave a link for it down in the description box. It'll tie all of this together for you in case you're wondering where all this comes from. So having a trusted support team is critical when we're trying to rebound in life. And that trusted support team really should include our healthcare providers. In fact, they're critical, especially if we contend on a regular basis with our health, both physical and otherwise. So in that first video, I shared that I had a really tough decade filled with injury and illness. But even prior to that decade, and even now, I've seen many doctors. I've moved 7 times. At least I think it's been 7. I need to count that out. And each time I've had to reestablish my healthcare team. I've had a range of experiences with doctors and other healthcare practitioners. Many of them earned my confidence, and some of them really made my blood boil. And I don't play when it comes to my healthcare. I've had to tell a couple doctors a thing or two over the years. In any case, my first ever injury where I actually ended up on crutches, I believe I was 13. I was playing a pickup game of softball and I twisted my knee sliding into second base. Fast forward about 6 years, I twisted my knee again playing tennis. And that time led to me having surgery several months later. Prior to the surgery, I was given all these forms to sign and I read through them thoroughly. And one key statement stood out to me: medicine is not an exact science, it is a practice. And at that point, it really gelled to me that doctors are not always right. They know more about the human body than me, but they actually didn't know me better than me. So what I've concluded is that the doctor-patient or practitioner-patient relationship is really a collaborative one. And I expect to be respected, taken seriously, not talked down to or dismissed. So collaboration and respect are absolutely paramount. But what does that really look like? Over the years and having conversations with people, just casual conversations with people, and even from my own experiences, there are really some crappy doctors out there. The flip side is that I've had some great experiences and I've actually had them early on, fortunately. And so it's been easy for me to determine when I'm actually having a crappy experience. What saddens me, though, is some people don't even know they're not getting great care because they have nothing to compare it to. So I want to offer some key lessons that I've learned along the way in finding doctors that you can actually trust. So if possible, number 1, try to establish your primary care physician before you even get sick. Because when you're clear-headed, you can be a bit more objective about the rapport you're looking for. Plus, when you do get sick, it should be easier to get in to see your doctor specifically, because you're an established patient. Whereas new patients usually have to wait a longer time for an appointment. Tip number 2, on that first visit, even if nothing is bothering you and you're just there for a routine physical, come with questions. How your doctor responds to your questions is absolutely imperative to establishing trust. Do they listen? Are they comfortable taking questions? Because some of them actually don't like to be asked questions. Do they actually answer your questions? Do they take the time to listen, or are they trying to rush you out the door? Or are they trying to rush out the door? Even if they are in a rush, you need to ask your question unless they're actually called for an emergency. But they need to see that you are serious about your concerns. Plus, it doesn't serve you well to leave your visit with unanswered questions. That only leaves you in an unsettled position. And if they can't deal with your questions, then they're not the practitioner for you. Tip number 3 is actually a follow-up to tip number 2. And I learned this after working in higher education because I've worked at universities with medical schools and teaching hospitals. And I've worked in college towns where students are often shadowing doctors. So they're usually much more thorough and on their best behavior when they're being observed. And I say this with a caveat because I've experienced doctors where when they're being observed, they come across as a know-it-all. But by and large, doctors and medical professionals try to model the utmost professionalism when other people are watching. So I highly recommend practices within a teaching system. Tip number 4, be a good patient and be honest. There's no point in lying to your doctor or withholding information from them. They usually can tell when you haven't done what you're supposed to do, and that might actually aggravate them. They may not know everything, but if they're thorough, they'll know when you aren't truthful. It's kind of like only flossing the week before your dentist appointment, leading up to your dentist appointment. Trust me, they know if you haven't done it. But by the way, if you have never been consistent at flossing and you hate your 6-month cleanings, you should create the habit of flossing every day. Your 6-month checkup will become a breeze after that. I'm a witness. But I digress. Along the lines of being a good patient, it's not just a matter of respectability, though I do think they take you more seriously when you take your care more seriously. But you simply get better care when you follow the plan that you and your doctor agreed to. You don't have to start over from scratch every time. If something didn't work out, you can rule it out completely because you gave it an honest try. And then you and your doctor can move on to something else. Tip number 5, be willing to travel, especially for proper specialty care. I think your primary care doctor should be local to you, probably within 5 to 10 minutes of your home, because when you're feeling sick, it shouldn't be a chore to see your doctor. You shouldn't have to be driving all over the place to see your doctor. But for specialty care, what's local to you may not actually be sufficient. During my tough decade, I was actually living in Virginia, but ended up back home in Indiana for my care. My primary care doctor was in Virginia though. But I had a tougher time with specialists, and I probably could have found one, but I wasn't up for a lot of trial and error. I just went back to what I knew was, or what I was already comfortable with. Plus, I knew if anything rose to the level of surgery, it would be simpler for me to be back home with my family. Another example was my sister who has celiac. One of her doctors actually told her that Black people don't get celiac. Crazy. So after she had her fill of doctors, she decided to drive a couple hours to see a specialist in Chicago, where she had a completely different experience. Tip number 6, speak up for yourself and give feedback in the moment as much as possible. The surveys afterwards are okay if you really need time to process. However, addressing it in the moment gives them an opportunity to course correct with you and do right by you specifically. And you leave the appointment feeling better, having the matter resolved versus leaving frustrated and upset. Speaking up doesn't always have to be confrontational though. Last summer I was getting my eyes checked and the optometrist asked me a question. He didn't seem to like my response and he was irritated. He interrupted me and attempted to scold me. I sat upright and I gave him the "I ain't your child, don't talk to me like that" look. And I said, "You asked me a question and this is my answer." He shrunk back and reset his tone. Another scenario was I was supposed to have surgery on my ankle and I was actually getting prepped for surgery. I was IV'd up and everything, but I was experiencing tachycardia, which is a rapid heartbeat. So I was actually in an outpatient surgery center, not an actual hospital. So they called in a cardiologist and his ruling was to cancel my surgery right then and there on the spot and for me to go to the emergency room. I looked at him like, "What? The emergency room?" And I asked, "Well, can I just go back to your office?" I went on to tell him that in ER, I'm probably just going to have to wait to see another cardiologist. So he told me that they could run specific tests at the hospital. So I said, "Well, do you have the capability to do those same tests in your office?" And he said yes. I let him know that I really did not want to go to the ER. It's already mid-afternoon. I was hungry and I was getting even more and more anxious because they were telling me that something could be wrong with my heart. And I didn't want to deal with the aggravation of the emergency room if I didn't have to. I was going to haggle that doctor every which way possible to avoid going to the emergency room. I had enough ER experiences to know to avoid it at all costs. So he said, okay. His office turned out to be a mile down the road. My dad, sister, and I met him there. So yeah, speak up. Last tip, number 7, go after the best care. I've had 5 orthopedic surgeries. Surgeries 2 through 5 were actually with the same medical group. I ended up with them because the day before I was supposed to have the second surgery with the surgeon who did my first surgery, the day before that first surgery, the day before I was supposed to have the second surgery with the first surgeon, his office called me and told me that he had to cancel. Now, let me start by saying with this example by saying that I actually liked the first surgeon, but my feelings soured right then and there. They actually offered no explanation as to why he was canceling, and I actually never heard back from them. The story that I have in my head was that he canceled on me for some last-minute golf excursion. I honestly don't know why he canceled, but how it happened felt so cold. And I was talking with some folks at work later on, telling them what happened, and they told me that they had seen this big time doctor from one of the college basketball teams in the state. And I was just kind of like, it never occurred to me to go after a big time doctor like that. So I called him and I went in to see him. Now, it turned out I didn't actually care for him. He came across as a bit arrogant. But I left there thinking, well, why stop at the college level? Let me go see the doctors that work with the pros. And it turns out that most of them are not exclusive to rich clientele or only professional athletes. It turned out that they were quite accessible. And I had a totally different experience. They actually set the standard for me, not just for my orthopedic care, but for my healthcare overall. So don't assume that you aren't worthy of certain doctors or that the cost will be out of reach. You might actually be pleasantly surprised. So those are the 7 tips. I'm going to stop right there. I know I could probably share even more, but to sum everything up, what to look for in a doctor, keep this in mind. Our relationships with our doctors and healthcare providers are really intimate relationships. We go to them when we are the most vulnerable. And when we are vulnerable, it's important to be seen and heard. And if you're not being seen and heard from your doctor, then you really need to move on to someone else who will see you and who will hear you. Do not settle for anything less. Well, I hope those tips were helpful to you. Do take care, and I will see you later, good people.